I need to caveat this. I am no libertarian. That does not mean that libertarians never provide useful information, and never make a convincing argument. They're never right about anything. They are. Sometimes right. Dead right. Here we are. A graphic that should prove to you that if you previously believed the American people were intelligent, you shouldn't. This is precisely why nobody has ever gone broke betting against the intelligence of the U.S. public. Right there. They have put their faith and their money in alternative medicine and organic food. Now, it stands to reason that if vaccine doctors and the people who do vaccine research were truly motivated solely by greed, then if you look at this graph, you realize that alternative medicine are making 28 billion, or no, alternative medicine is making 34 billion, and organic food is making 28 billion. Where by contrast, the vaccine market is less than $13 billion in size, which means that if you were truly greedy, you would stop your job producing vaccines and you would go into competition with the likes of Natural News and start your own website selling diet pills and, that, medicine, not medicine, well, vitamins and that sort of shit to the brain addled American public because you'll go much further doing that than what they're doing, which means that there must be some motive beyond money and profits because they continue to do vaccine research. Could it be that they actually believe in the common good? My point is not to attack profit, no business would exist without it, but simply to show how absurd the argument is that because drug companies are driven by the profit motive, you can't trust them. Money and profits don't become magically better or worse when governments are selling unproven snake oil instead of medicine, or when governments or corporations are selling unproven snake oil instead of tested medicine. You must look at scientific evidence to judge claims about products, not the price tag or the bottom line of the companies who make it. Sometimes I hear people suggest that it's just the big pharma that's the problem. Money only corrupts when big government gets lots of profit concentrated in one place. Let's look at the annual sales of Monsanto, big evil GMO company, and Whole Foods, patron saint of all that is good and natural. Whole Foods net sales was 11.7 billion. Monsanto's net sales were 13.5 billion. Well, it seems like making money can't be such a bad thing after all. Again, the point about profit and its implications on the motives, trustworthiness, and reliability of an industry. If the 12 billion from vaccines, 3% of all drug sales, is enough to corrupt and discredit the entire government, pharmaceutical industry, and scientific establishment, what exactly does 1662 billion in a year in organics and alternative medicine sales due to their credibility? The answer is nothing. Evidence, not vague fear mongering about greed, is the only thing that can settle scientific questions. Now, yet again, I'm going to have to put this in the underbar, need to make a very, good point about Andrew Wakefield, the fraudster who has a legion of psychopaths and enablers here on YouTube, unfortunately, who will say and do anything, even at their own expense, to defend their fur, their quote unquote messiah. But I'd like to make and point something out to you that is really, I think, pivotal, in all of this because, there's this perception that they're being discriminated against because, a paper got retracted and they're not able to, they're not getting the platform for which they're, they feel entitled, without even doing the proper work to earn, you know, they feel entitled to the Lancet, to be the first paper to be in it, and they think that the evidence, against vaccines is being suppressed. Only it isn't. You know, they're willing to lie and say things like there's a plethora of papers that back Andrew Wakefield up. Only there aren't. They don't exist anywhere. Anything is possible when you lie. He's got a legion of sycophants who love to come into the comments section here on YouTube and everything. So I'd like to point something out. Andrew Wakefield's original paper in the Lancet, as it was a study of 12 patients. The plural of antidote is not necessarily data.
Anecdote is not necessarily data. The definition of anecdote is, quote, an amusing or interesting story about a real incident or person. And the definition of data is, quote, facts and statistics collected together for reference or analysis. These two kinds of information are very different in that one of them is based essentially on human memory, interpretation, and perception, while the other is based on agreed upon observations and facts about the world around us. Many people use anecdotes to form the basis of their theory about everything from what happens when we die to what kinds of treatments are good for this disease to pretty much everything else you can think of. People are really prone to seeing these short, amusing stories that seem to give some kind of general lesson, but in fact may just be a fluke or may not even be true in the first place. And the big problem is that anecdotes may or may not be representative of the bigger picture. And to get at that bigger picture, you actually have to do a rigorous analysis. So, as an example, consider vitamin C and breast cancer. For example, a person might believe that vitamin C cures cancer, and maybe breast cancer specifically. Now, this person is likely to have a reason for believing that. That belief doesn't just come out of nowhere. So, for example, maybe they heard about a family member who took lots of vitamin C and beat cancer, or they heard about their friend's coworker's uncle who did the same thing, or maybe they even saw some doctor or somebody talking about it on YouTube. So, these are all anecdotes. These are all just instances of somebody doing something and a certain effect happening. Now, the problem is that you can't necessarily draw cause and effect. One of the biggest problems is that people don't often take into account the negative anecdotes, the examples that go against their theory. So what about the times when people take vitamin C, but they die from cancer anyway? People tend not to pay attention to that kind of data. That's related to the confirmation bias, in which we basically throw away evidence that doesn't jive with our position and just seek out evidence that confirms it. Another, perhaps even bigger problem is that correlation does not equal causation, meaning that just because two things occur around the same time or simultaneously or one follows another, it doesn't mean that one causes the other. There could be a third factor causing both, or they could just be a coincidence. For example, if somebody beats their cancer after taking lots of vitamin C, there are a lot of questions you have to ask to even get close to understanding whether it was the vitamin C that did it or something else. For example, was this person on chemotherapy, immunotherapy, some other sort of evidence, science-based treatment for cancer? If so, then it's going to be really hard in that individual case to figure out whether vitamin C did anything at all. It's not that vitamin C could not be a good cancer treatment or a good supplement for people going through cancer treatment. It's just that we can't know on the basis of anecdotes. However, when researchers did actually look at the effect of taking high doses of vitamin C for people going through breast cancer treatment, they found in a 2008 study that looked at not just one single study, but actually analyzed a bunch of different studies put together, they found the following. Quote, post-diagnosis, vitamin C supplement use may be associated with a reduced risk of mortality. Dietary vitamin C intake was also statistically significantly associated with a reduced risk of total mortality and breast cancer-specific mortality. Score 1 for vitamin C. Yet that statement is a far cry from vitamin C cures cancer. For example, it's important to remember that saying that vitamin C reduces mortality is inherently a statistical statement, meaning that many people who did take vitamin C sadly did not experience any benefits from it. I present this case for a number of reasons. One is to show that anecdotes are not always wrong, but that you actually have to do a rigorous analysis to figure out whether they have any value at all. And also that often the claims are exaggerated, as in this case. Still, you might be wondering, this is kind of a weird case for me to present if my point is to show that anecdotes aren't always, good sources of information. But the point is that you couldn't have known either way. Why? Because anecdotes go both ways. For example, if I was somebody who knew somebody who had been going through cancer treatment and they had been taking lots of vitamin C and unfortunately they didn't beat their cancer, well, then I might just conclude, well, vitamin C has absolutely no effect on breast cancer. It's all just a myth. It's just all these, weird naturopaths coming up with this idea. And the problem is that there actually is an effect of vitamin C on breast cancer. So using anecdotes is unreliable because I couldn't have really known that there is an effect. So again, the only way to know for sure is to carefully gather and systematically analyze lots of data on the point that you are trying to understand, find converging lines of evidence.
The sample size, for scientists to arrive at any particular conclusion would be in the thousands. Even had Andrew Wakefield's paper in the Lancet not been retracted by the Lancet, all he ever had or amounted to was 12 case studies that were not in any way large enough to draw conclusions from. The sample size to draw any conclusions from 12 individuals would be to commit the fallacy of insufficient statistics. His paper in the Lancet was a pathetically weak paper, even before he was discredited and before retraction. It doesn't prove what you people think it proves. And to think that it proves anything is to fall victim to yourself and your own confirmation bias and fall for the fallacy of insufficient statistics all over again. The plural of 12 people, 12 case reports, is not data.
Hypothetical friend of mine. We'll call him Bob. Suppose Bob goes tomorrow and buys a scratch-off lottery ticket. He wins $100 on a $1 ticket. Bob goes back the next day, and again he wins $100. The action and the result is the same on the third day. In that moment, Bob decides that he is going to quit his job, sell his house, and become a professional scratch-off lottery player. Based on his experience, he should be able to make thousands of dollars a day. How do you think this will play out for Bob? Will he be able to buy a mansion and a yacht with all his winnings by the end of the first year? Probably not. But how can you be so confident that his plan is foolish? What knowledge prevents us from making the same conclusion that Bob does? If we calculated the chance of Bob winning 3 scratch-offs in a row, we would find it to be quite low. But it did indeed happen for him. From his perspective, the historical chances of winning the first 3 games was 1 in 1. If he then extrapolates that probability to all future chances of winning, he makes the wrong decision to become a professional lottery player. In the trivial sense, Bob has committed the fallacy of the hasty generalization, also called the fallacy of...
So, to draw any conclusions from the paper, even if it hadn't been retracted, would be to fall victim to the fallacy of hasty generalization.
Insufficient statistics. Bob's taken too small a sample and generalized it prematurely. Over time, he's most likely going to spend his last dollar trying to replicate this unlikely outcome. In fact, all gambling is based on our inability to comprehend statistics and sample size. Over the very long term, the house always wins, which is why casino owners tend to be very wealthy and powerful. The only legal way to have any positive outcome for the player is to quit after a low probability favorable outcome. But there's a deeper fallacy I want to address here. It's about the value we place on anecdotes. I'll freely confess that I'm quite guilty of this fallacy about some topics, and I see from the comments on some of my other videos that some of you are too. An anecdote is a self-contained story about an event. I'm specifically referring to anecdotes about alternative medicine or paranormal or supernatural phenomenon. For example, The one I heard a lot on my video about chiropractic was, it may not be scientific, but it cured my headaches or back pain, neuralgia, or whatever, when the doctors couldn't. Or the ever-popular anecdote that goes, I knew this woman who used homeopathy, or whatever, and it cured her cancer after the doctors had sent her home to die. Why isn't that a compelling argument for an alternative therapy? For the same reason that Bob is never going to get rich scratching off lottery tickets. The sample size isn't sufficient to generalize from. Yes, one patient may have subjectively responded to a therapy in a positive way.
Yes, 12 patients may have subjectively, exhibited symptoms in the study.
But that doesn't tell us very much about how the next patient will
about how the
respond.
next patient
It's only when the sample size becomes significant that we can begin to draw
to the MMR
conclusions.
vaccine. It doesn't tell us very much about how the next patient would respond to the next, to the MMR vaccine. So, here we have, insufficient sample size through to which to draw conclusions. Ergo, even if Andrew Wakefield's paper hadn't been discredited, even if the telltale signs of scientific fraud hadn't been exposed, even if Andrew Wakefield had not fallen, been discredited, and lost his license, all he ever amounted to was 12 case reports, that may have just been ultimately a coincidence.
That's why science-based medicine values large population studies more than case reports or amazing anecdotes of miraculous cures. And yet, when we view alternative medicine claims, they often rely heavily on anecdotal evidence and studies in very small populations. Case studies are likewise of limited utility. They do give us a starting point for more rigorous investigations, but they don't possess the power to tell us about risks or efficacy. If you're in a debate with someone who is citing papers to support their views, one thing to check is the size of the populations used, usually indicated by the
N factor in the Andrew Wakefield paper was 12.
letter N, as in N equals 100. If groups are matched to each other, we usually call them cohorts. The control group, and there needs to be a control group if we're eliminating placebo effect, and the treatment group should be roughly the same in size and composition. How big the cohorts are determines the statistical power of the test. A clinical drug trial may be evaluated on cohorts of thousands or even tens of thousands. Meanwhile, alternative medicine is often conducted on very small groups, less than 50.
Yes, just like these alternative medicine studies, it was less than 50 people.
If they ever want to be taken seriously by those of us who value reason and logic, they need to correct this methodological flaw. A homeopath referred me to a systematic review paper to cite its effectiveness, apparently without having really understood the outcome of the study. The homeopath authors concluded that homeopathy could be demonstrated to be effective only in very small populations. For the 8 largest trials, there was no detectable difference between placebo and homeopathy. Completely unrelated to the previous point is another fallacy I want to deal with while I'm on the topic. This is the treatment X isn't possible to evaluate in a clinical study. The argument being made is that a treatment only works for patients who believe in the therapy or who receive proper indoctrination or training. This is a claim I hear a lot for holistic medicine, Reiki, Qi, and other energy healing modalities. They assert that a receptive attitude is necessary for the treatments to be effective. I've even seen outcome studies stratified, that is, separated out by the patient's self-reported faith in the treatment. Of course, we have a name for treatments that rely on the beliefs of the patients to be effective. The term is placebo. This is a big enough topic for its own video. I'll briefly say that I respect the medical value of a placebo. It has a powerful biological effect. However, I don't think it's ethical to give a seriously ill patient a placebo in place of effective therapy. I know I'd rather have a realistic view of the outcome of any treatment I'm receiving, and I'd expect an ethical clinician to use placebo only in cases of self-limiting disorders or where there is no effective treatment. This leads me to my last point. Alternative medicine is often touted by proponents as having fewer side effects than conventional medicine. This is sometimes true. Homeopathy is just water in most cases, so it's not likely to cause allergic reactions or kidney damage. But the point is that it has the same effectiveness as giving sugar pills, but more expensive to the patient. And in some cases, it displaces the more effective evidence-based therapy, which is its own kind of side effect. We don't choose our treatments on their side effects alone. We choose them for their ability to treat the disorder, and we balance that against the possible risks. This is something we do in any human endeavor. It's a logical consequence that anything we choose that has an actual biological effect might have multiple effects, some undesirable. The argument being employed here is called the perfect solution fallacy, a form of the false dilemma. It proposes that we reject workable solutions because they don't completely eliminate the problem, or they have some negative consequence. One favorite statistic is the number of people who die from drug interactions or medical mistakes, as though this validates the non-effective treatment of homeopathy. I've been accused by some of being naive. I find this very amusing, as though my personal evidence-based standard of what therapy I choose is somehow an unreachable goal. I've also been chided for demonstrating the weaknesses of alternative medicine, but not the weaknesses of conventional medicine. To do so would be a false balance. Of course, we should continuously strive for better medicine, to reduce side effects, to find out the best solution for the patient. But the methods we need to employ to make that improvement are evidence-based methods. I don't attack alternative medicine for being mystical. I attack it for not being demonstrated to work. So, to summarize, the basis for gambling and alternative medicine have an element in common and exploit the same flaw in our thinking. They rely on a hasty generalization from a small sample size. So the next time you're tempted to try some pseudoscientific therapy because a trusted friend relates a positive anecdote, remember Bob, the professional lottery player, and look for the outcomes of large population studies instead. I'll leave you with two favorite quotes on the topic. From Roger Brenner, "The plural of anecdote is not data." And from that great scientist that kept us laughing, Richard Feynman, "Science is what we have learned about how to keep from fooling ourselves." As always, the best advice comes from a trusted physician. Stay safe and be smart. Thanks for watching.
In summary, again, to point this out about this, all Andrew Wakefield had, even if it had not been retracted, was 12 case reports. The plural of antidote in this case is not, in fact, data, and to draw any conclusions.
Leonardo da Vinci was a real Renaissance man. Not only did
To draw any conclusions whatsoever from a population of 12 people would be to commit a hasty generalization fallacy. Andrew Wakefield has been discredited. Andrew Wakefield has been proven beyond any reasonable doubt to be a fraud. His paper was retracted. It didn't hold up, and it's amazing the Lancet published a paper that only was able to cite 12 case reports in the first place. That right there, in of itself, should have been a red flag, but apparently it slipped through the cracks and it was not noticed by the peer reviewers back then.